Harry is a liar, at least according to the federal government. Yes, oh yes, United States federal government, the Department of Homeland Security. During a trial regarding Prince Harry's visa status, when asked if his drug use within the book that he claimed was true, they said, well, maybe, maybe not. A book is not an accurate record. He wasn't on trial, so entirely it's impossible that he might have exaggerated or played with things a bit in order to increase the sales of his book. This is catastrophic for Harry and Meghan. This calls into question, once again, their credibility. At the United States federal level, the United States government is calling them liars, essentially. And while this is about Harry, a lot of it is about Meghan too, because let's not forget, they have been caught in a lot of lies. Obviously, in the Oprah Winfrey interview, we have Meghan's claim that her and Harry were married 3 days before their wedding by the Archbishop of Canterbury. He slapped down that conclusion. He's like, I don't know where they're getting that. That definitely wasn't the case. And we also have all the stuff regarding a title for Archie, because Meghan strongly alluded that it was the color of his skin, which might be why he didn't get a royal title upon birth. But of course, he wasn't even entitled to one based on the letters of patent. Those have been amended for Prince William's children because they will be the children of the future king. But Harry and Meghan's kids, well, hey, they can be a prince and princess when Charles becomes king. And wouldn't you know it, that is exactly what happened. And these are just two of the big things. There have been multitude of lies and information told by Harry and Meghan over the years. But this notion that perhaps a lot of what was in Spare is subjective or maybe even just simply not true, and that there might be a whole slew of other things that Prince Harry has said over the years that are simply not true. This once again highlights their huge lack of credibility, that a government entity is basically calling them liars will forever taint their brand. And this is hysterical because this is perhaps even what Prince Harry's people gave the US federal government. Now, it could be that he lied in the book or that he's lying now, but somewhere, some way, somehow, a lie has been told, and you can't take those things back. And this will once again continue to deteriorate Harry and Meghan's public image, because Harry and Meghan have made it a huge part of their platform that they are fighting against misinformation. In fact, I have a couple of really doozy quotes from Prince Harry about misinformation and the inherent dangers of that are now definitely called into question, since it's been revealed that Prince Harry perhaps is one of the biggest abusers of misinformation. So we will go into this today. But if you guys haven't been to Royal News Network, my name is Brittany. I provide you all compelling royal commentary. So if you want to smash that subscribe button, that would be awesome. We're heading to 150,000 subscribers. And I'm very excited to meet that mark. I think that'll be huge. I'm so excited. So if you want to come back and see more royal content, and we'll have a new program here launching pretty soon. So if you want to keep an eye on that, that would be awesome. That'll cover a lot more royal news than we're able to most of the time on these videos. And I also have just 2 early bird spots left for our trip to Scotland. So if you are interested in heading to the Scottish Highlands and seeing the beautiful country that Queen Elizabeth loved so much, and seeing where J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter and was very, very inspired by Harry Potter. In fact, the Balmoral Hotel, which is right on Princess Street in Edinburgh, is where she wrote the final book. So if you are a big Harry Potter fan, you will see a lot of inspiration there as well. So feel free to check that out. I'll put a link up above here, and then there's one obviously in the description down below as well. So as this trial unfolded, I have sort of mixed feelings about it. Yes, I think it's important that we know Prince Harry's visa status, because if he has, let's say, diplomatic visa, there's actually certain crimes that he could not be prosecuted for. And that to me is huge. They do this and allow diplomatic status for people who are part of embassies and those sorts of things, so that the government where they're staying in can't sort of arrest them for no good cause, that they sort of have this diplomatic immunity so that they can act without perhaps pressure from another government. But at the same time too, obviously, there have been times where that privilege has been abused. There's a very famous case in the UK regarding that. A diplomat's wife actually killed somebody in a car accident, and she fled to the United States to avoid prosecution. So again, these are huge diplomatic issues. So if he has a diplomatic visa, we should 100% deserve to know that. But at the same time, I feel like people are really pushing for all this drug use and everything, thinking that it'll kick him out of the country. And I just don't think that's the case. But the big thing here is, the huge thing is, of course, the statement by the Department of Homeland Security's lawyer regarding Harry and the truthfulness of his words. In this world, or really in any relationship, truth is a big portion of it. And on this channel, I provide you guys commentary, but I always try to go back to original sources from like news articles and stuff like that and read them so you guys can hear what other people are reporting. I react to them. And so I'm not the arbiter of all truth and information. I give you guys my opinion on it. But Harry and Meghan had basically placed themselves in the world as the arbiters of truth. They are always giving us truth. It's the palace, it's the media, it's basically every person in the entire world, every troll on social media. They are all liars. Harry and Meghan are always telling the truth. But is that not true? Is that not actually true? Because the Department of Homeland Security gives us a pretty good indication that that might not be entirely true, at least in his book or maybe even on his visa application. Somewhere Harry is lying. But I think the most critical thing is if his book is called into question, basically it destroys pretty much his whole post-Brexit career, because this guy has made a huge stink about misinformation. There's a lot of quotes in here, and even on Archwell's website, Harry and Meghan go over like punishments for people who spread misinformation. They want censorship. They want all these sorts of things. Because let me be clear, misinformation exists. It exists everywhere. And people have their different interpretations of things. I mean, there are literally people who think the world is flat. But they are allowed to believe that, and they're allowed to even say that. But it's your job as the public, it is your responsibility as a person reading information, looking at multiple sources and deciding and concluding for yourself what you think is the truth. Because when you allow a third party to determine what truth is, they can tell you anything. If you are relying on a journalist to always tell you the truth, what if they're lying and you just simply don't know? Because you have decided that they can never not be telling you the truth. I think this is a huge and important discussion to have in this day and age, because I did have somebody on Twitter once telling me, well, you're calling yourself a journalist. And I was like, well, I don't actually. I call myself a commentator because I think that's important. Yes, I share news and I commentate on it, but I think straight journalism is something that I'm just not actually as much of a huge fan of personally, because I like digging deeper. I like giving my thoughts and opinions on things. People, of course, always can go back to the original piece of information. But the emphasis this person was putting on is that once you claim that role of journalist, all of a sudden you have this exalted place in the world. But it's like, but you really shouldn't, because how do we know journalists are telling the truth? Because people can tell you, oh, I don't have a bias at all. But they might be totally lying to you. They might have a strong bias, but they twist everything into a way where you might not be able to pick up on it. I think of Omid Scobie as a great example. He also claims that he's trying to return truth and integrity to journalism. And yet he is a complete and total shill for Harry and Meghan. He will not report negative news on them. He only reports positive news. You'll notice me, I try to report negative and positive news about all the royals when I can. If I like a Meghan Markle outfit, I say it. If I think Prince William or Catherine may have done something differently, like Prince William going to the Women's World Cup, or perhaps William's comments on Gaza, I will say it. Why? Because that's important. Because yes, I have my bias. I never lie about that. I never try to dissuade people and say I don't. But at the same time, I try to exhibit integrity and kind of play and kind of examine both sides. I'm not afraid to post negative news about people I generally like, or positive news about people I generally don't like. And that's critical, because that's not what Harry and Meghan are doing. That is not what Harry and Meghan are doing. They are saying they have the truth and that everybody else is telling the lie. But what if the opposite is true? So let's get into some of these comments. This is from Bardo, who was a lawyer for the Department of Homeland Security. He says, just saying something in a book doesn't make it true, which is true. But we'll get into that. The Prince's book was written for a commercial audience and does not necessarily tell the full story. Okay, but here's the thing. If you're telling us you're using drugs, that's a pretty hard fact. Now, there's some things where you can finesse things, where you tell part of the story, not the whole story. I actually do think of, let's say, Catherine talking about her abdominal surgery, or the palace technically doing it. They've told us she's had abdominal surgery, but not what for. And so, yes, there's a piece of information missing, but they've told us that she's had this surgery. But Harry telling us that he's taken drugs, well, that's really hard to dissuade. So how are we not supposed to interpret that he's taken drugs? Because he told us exactly that. He even told us what kind of drugs he took. And so because of that, we can draw a pretty firm conclusion. Catherine's a little bit different. I mean, I think I can draw a strong conclusion based on her recovery time and something like that, and stuff like that, that her surgery was probably complicated, probably pretty serious, not serious in terms of life-threatening, but serious in terms of the actual process of the surgery itself. That means it was pretty invasive and stuff like that. So we can draw, I think, conclusions from that, from the information they gave us, and I don't think that's truly speculative. But Harry telling us, yes, I've taken X, Y, and Z, including magic mushrooms, I tried cocaine, and all these sorts of things, that's not subject to really interpretation. That's not really. And of course, it is entirely true as well. Like I told you in the intro about looking at truth and information, of course, not everything necessarily in a book is true. I have all these books on my shelf, and sometimes what my responsibility is to read through them and go, okay, I think this is true, I think this is not true. So interesting story. So I read a book about the Borgias. I thought it was really interesting because they were an Italian aristocratic family, and one of the members ended up becoming Pope, and there was a lot of rumors that he had illegitimate children, and one of them was this guy named Caesar, and the Lucrezia Borgia, and so these were huge names in the Italian Middle Ages. And Caesar was connected to Leonardo da Vinci and actually Niccolo Machiavelli. And in the Borgia book I read, it gave a pretty strong case for why the children, Caesar and Lucrezia, were not the illegitimate children of Alexander, who was the Pope. But another book started off automatically repeating these same rumors that had been around for so long. And I was like, okay, I don't think I want to read the rest of this book just because I read a different book that took a different take and I think gave a pretty decent argument. Whereas you're going with a story, and because this Pope happened to be unpopular, believe it or not, people who end up being unpopular in history tend to get exaggerated stories and fake stories told about them in order to delegitimize them. Of course, that's not happening here with Prince Harry, but not everything in a book that you will read is true, including in Harry's. And another point is said, Prince Harry's memoir is not proof he took drugs, and it could have been embellished to sell books, a lawyer for the Biden administration argued. So this is John Bardo. And he told the DC court the book isn't sworn testimony or proof. But because Harry put it in his book, because he wants us to believe so many things about the royal family, that Prince William got into a physical altercation, that comments were made about Archie's skin tone, and Meghan had this incident where she wanted to end her life, and those sorts of things, should we not call those into question somewhat? Because if he embellished things in order to sell books, of course, Harry and Meghan could also embellish things in order to sell an interview, in order to elevate their profile. There's a million different reasons why they could have lied and embellished. And because of that, everything about them now must be called into question. Because I'm sure the Biden administration's lawyers reached out to Harry's team and go, hey, what do you want us to say? And they're like, well, who knows? I mean, it's not exactly true. I mean, Harry could have, miffed something a couple of times. But again, that is a huge question on Harry's integrity, on his ability to tell the truth, and Meghan's as well. Because I have no doubt that she read this book and she signed off on it too. So if she's complicit in the lie, that makes everything 1,000 times worse, because essentially they're both in on it. And how can we trust anything they say in the future? And again, this is a huge problem, because here are some of the doozies that they've told us over time. He's told us, of course, about Prince William's assault, that King Charles joked about Harry's parentage, that he killed apparently 25 enemy combatants in Afghanistan, that Harry and Prince William urged their father not to marry Camilla. We also have Harry admitting to his drug use, cocaine at age 17, that the BBC is how he found out his grandmother died, and that he accuses his stepmother, and of course William and Catherine and their teams as well, of leaking stories about him and William. Of course, again, eventually about him and Meghan. And that Camilla suggested to Meghan that Harry could become the Governor General of Bermuda, which I don't even understand why that's a thing. I'm going through like all the incidents in Harry's book. I need to actually read his book so I can tear it apart, but honestly, I looked through it one day for something and I was like, oh my gosh, all the sentences are so short. It's like written like a text message stream. And I'm like, that's odd. I don't like that. That Charles and Camilla wanted Kate to change the spelling of her name from Catherine with a C to Catherine with a K because you cannot have too many royals that have C in their name. Like just stupid stuff. That he found out Prince William and Kate were to be married from the news, and that his father didn't hug him after his mother died, that it was Catherine and William who encouraged him to wear the Nazi uniform as a costume, that Catherine and William were huge fans of Suits, and he was really worried that they were going to be desperate to get an autograph from her. We have as well Meghan and Harry, of course, in the Oprah Winfrey interview. Meghan says that she entered into the royal marriage naively, and even though she was in her mid to late 30s at that point. And of course, their secret wedding, that Kate made Meghan cry before the wedding, how Harry and Meghan said there were concerns and conversations about how dark Archie's skin would be, that Meghan, of course, had thoughts about ending her life, that she felt trapped as a member of the royal family, or that Meghan helped him realize he was trapped in the royal system. That, of course, racism was why they left. That Meghan had to hand over her keys, passport, and driver's license when she married into the royal family. Again and again, these are huge allegations that now we all know could potentially be 1,000% made up, or at least exaggerated, embellished. Because here's the thing about royals. Royals do drive their own car. Meghan Markle doesn't drive her own car anymore because, of course, she needs security to feel important. So she has to have them drive her around because, you know, they have nothing better to do during the day. But when it comes to the actual royals, we've seen Catherine driving her own car several times. Does she drive it all the time? Of course not. But, of course, they have access to their car keys. Maybe they were just worried because obviously some of the rumor is that their dog, Guy, I think, was hit by a car. And within like the Kensington Palace complex, and maybe she was driving, they're like, yeah, we're gonna take those keys right now because you don't know how to drive on the other side of the road. That could have been it. And obviously as well, I know people who worked for an international organization, and the person who would arrange their travel really actually did keep their passports because they traveled so much that it was just easier to actually leave it with the person, the head of their department, because they would make all the flight arrangements and they could keep track and make sure that the passports were good, get the visas sent in, and all these sorts of intricate paperwork things that these people just didn't have time for. So that is what they were doing. So again, Meghan could have totally exaggerated and dramatized, which was something actually very simple and how they do things. But the critical thing is Harry and Meghan's campaign against so-called misinformation. That is why this hurts so much for them. Why it should hurt so much for them, because everything about them should be called into question. Everything they've said should be called into question, because here's Harry talking to the Aspen Institute, this Institute Against Misinformation, about this dangerous thing that has infused our lives. Not that misinformation didn't exist before, because people did really believe the earth was flat at one point. I mean, they didn't at certain points, it just all depended on the time. But there was a lot of misinformation about diseases and everything, because misinformation always exists, Harry. Just because, yes, it can be spread faster now doesn't mean it didn't ever exist before. So here's some of his talking points to the Aspen Institute. He said, misinformation is a global humanitarian crisis, Prince Harry said during the panel, which focused in particular on tech companies like Facebook and Twitter. I felt it personally over the years, and now I'm watching it happen globally. The scariest part about it is that you don't need to be online to be affected by it. It's important to recognize that this problem did not originate on social media. I learned from a very early age that the incentives of publishing are not necessarily aligned with the incentives of truth. Well, that could apply to Harry and Meghan too. It's not really incentivized for them to tell the truth. Now, again, some of my conclusions I make on this channel could be totally wrong, but I felt like I made a pretty good conclusion about Netflix or something recently, and I was like, wow, I was like spot on. But I, of course, am making conclusions, but I'm never saying I am the person who you should take all truth from. You should look at a variety of sources. Again, it is your job, not a business, not a government, to determine what truth is. That should be your job as a consumer. Because again, when you leave it to a third party, they can do whatever they want. Who knows if they're telling you the truth or not? And so that's why it's important for you. It's not, the burden shouldn't be on the tech companies. The burden is on the consumer to determine what truth is for them. And yes, it might be different than other people, but that's part of life as well, but let's keep going. He then spoke about he and his wife Meghan Markle's experience being targeted by the UK press. They sadly conflate profit with purpose and news with entertainment. They don't report the news, they create it. And they've turned fact-based news into opinion-based gossip. I lost my mother to this, and obviously I'm determined not to lose the mother of my children to the same thing. Okay, Harry, your mother died in a drunk driving accident. She didn't die because of misinformation. She died because she wasn't wearing a seatbelt in a drunk driving accident, and her driver happened to be intoxicated. And again, she and Dodi Fayed would probably have survived if they'd been wearing their seatbelts. So misinformation is not the thing that killed Diana. And of course, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have also turned perhaps misinformation into profit, into cold, hard cash. Who knows how much of their Harry and Meghan documentary was true? You know, obviously in their documentary, they talked constantly, or the reality TV show, I usually call it that, they talked constantly about how Meghan was stalked and harassed, but they had to buy stock images to try to sell this huge harassment campaign that she was under because they didn't have any actual evidence of it. That's how bad it was. It was so unbelievably bad that they did not have the evidence. And one time the stock image was just so clearly that, and I'm like, that's embarrassing, guys. And then they showed this video of a couple guys maybe on Meghan Markle's porch, but I'm like, you couldn't even tell what they were doing. Like, how do I know that they're paparazzi stalking her or trying to get into her house? Or they could just be the real estate office because she was renting coming over to check something out. Like, how do we know? Again, misinformation does exist, but Harry and Meghan have also profited and benefited from it. They've also benefited from turning the royal family into a prestigious institution, into a sideshow attraction to a certain extent. Harry and Meghan have profited from the same things they turn back and complain to the media about. And so again, they're totally blind to the reality of their situation. And I think it is true that media is now driven more by commentary than it is in just basic news facts. But part of that is I think people are entrenching in their different sides too, because the mainstream media, the media that we thought was mostly objective, is not. That they've been hiding their bias under objectivity. And so that everybody now sort of knows that. So even the big publications, they question their intentions because we don't actually know if they're telling the truth or not, because they have been guilty sometimes of misinformation or spinning a story a particular way as well. So this exists on all levels. And it's not just the British media, it's not just the American media, it's a lot of different places. But again, consumers, you guys have the right to view other videos, other channels. I will not ever dissuade you from that, but I will say sometimes where I'm like, yeah, I don't see any particular proof in this particular video. Somebody asked me about that once. I was like, well, I see no image from their actual flights or anything that this person is actually talking about. So I can't really say I don't particularly think that's true. But again, feel free to disagree with me. I'm just giving you my thoughts and opinions. Okay, so next moved on. The conversation later moved on to the way in which the internet allows its users to create bespoke realities, which reinforce their beliefs rather than necessarily exposing them to the truth. In one single household, you can have 3 or 4 versions of reality, which I'm sure actually exists in Harry and Meghan's household, by the way. Harry said, "This isn't a case of this could happen to you. This is already happening to you. We can all feed into it if we're not aware of it. And if we're aware of our digital diet, we can be more conscious of what we pass on, what we don't, what we're consuming, and how it affects the way we think." Now, this is true. I will give him props. This is true. But again, Harry and Meghan are guilty of the same stinking things. They are not these innocent parties in all this. They are contributing to misinformation as well. So they can't stand there and go, well, this is happening to you. This is a global pandemic. Oh my gosh, this is so scary. And not realize that they are contributing to the same thing. Panel's host, journalist Stephen Levy, brought up the vocal minority of anti-Harry and Meghan accounts, which I would say is not a vocal minority, it's a majority, by the way, which had flooded his Twitter feed following the announcement of Harry's participation in the panel. "We know that a small group of accounts are allowed to create a huge amount of chaos online and destruction without any consequences," Harry responded. "People are susceptible and vulnerable to persuasion, desperate to be part of something." Again, Harry, pot calling the kettle black here. He pointed out that the real danger comes when journalists and publishers give credibility to the misinformation, using the term Mexit as an example. Oh, they really, really do hate that. But the word came out because it rhymed with Brexit, and everybody knew Meghan was the reason they were leaving. Harry, we're not dumb. Again, Harry wants censorship. He doesn't want freedom. You can tell this. He doesn't want free flow of information. That's why something like X or Twitter is so important. It is, to a certain extent, the free flow of information. But Harry's idea that there's all this chaos, again, it's all self-serving what he's doing. It's totally for him completely self-serving and protecting Meghan. That is all it's about, is protecting Meghan's ego, because she doesn't like that people don't like her. And I don't think he likes that people don't like him anymore either. Like, tough, but it's kind of what life is like at this point for him. So again, this is disconnect from reality. And so he, again, talks about Mexit. The term Mexit was a misogynistic term created by a troll amplified by royal correspondence, and it grew and grew on mainstream media. But it was catchy and it was easy to explain things, Harry. That's just kind of how it works sometimes. Sorry, I know that I hurt Meghan's feelings, but we all knew she was the one who pushed it. We're not stupid. And again, that he doesn't understand that he could also be being manipulated. Again, goodness gracious is me. Referring to the phrase that has become a shorthand for his and Meghan's exit from royal life last year. When a lie spreads on social media, it's dangerous. But when the same lie is given credibility by journalists or publishers, it's unethical. And as far as I'm concerned, an abuse of power. If the media is supposed to be holding us to account, who is holding them to account? The media isn't really totally holding all of us collectively to account. They're there for the sole purpose of repeating information that they've learned. So for example, if you go to a court trial and you hear the testimony and everything, and if you are a true journalist, unbiased, not sharing anything about your opinion, your objective, your sole purpose is to tell the objective truth about the trial. Person said X, person said this, lawyer did that, judge did this. That is what your job is. It's there to hold people in power to account, but Harry wants it to hold all of us to an account. And again, what he is advocating for is censorship. This is what he wants. He wants censorship. He wants to stop certain information from getting out, even if it's true, even if it's not true. Who cares? The information deserves to be out there. So for example, I'm not a fan of the Meghan using a surrogate narrative. I don't like it. I don't think it totally makes sense. I don't think it totally works when you actually think about it objectively. I just don't think it makes total sense, because surrogacy is very, very hard to do in the UK. To bring a child over that was just born from the US, because most surrogacy happens in the US now, would be exceedingly complicated. And in fact, if a surrogate has a child in the UK, the child belongs to the surrogate immediately, and whoever the father is, not the mother. So there would actually have to be an adoption process. Again, hugely complicated. I think what happened is Harry and Meghan played games and it blew up in their faces. But I try to say, well, that doesn't make sense from time to time. But people are allowed to believe it if they want. Do I think it's helpful? Not really, because I'm more interested in sort of things that can be proven. But if people want to believe it, if they keep wanting to talk about it, I mean, I'm not saying you can't do it. Again, I don't think it's particularly helpful. But again, you are allowed to do that. And that is what free speech is. Free speech is your ability to share your thoughts no matter how crazy they are. And yes, certain things may need to be curtailed, certain things may need to be investigated. But what Harry wants to do is stop anybody from making negative comments about his wife. That is his sole purpose. And so because of that, we also had this whole thing on Archwell. I took this directly from archwell.org, guys. And this is what they want for media companies when it comes to certain misinformations. Now, there's a couple of different objectives here, and I don't think I grabbed all of them, but I grabbed their little blurbs about certain things because I was like, so should this apply to Harry now? I think this should apply to Harry now if he's lying somewhere. It says accountability norms. Promote new norms that create personal and professional consequences within communities and networks for individuals who willfully violate the public trust and use their privilege to harm the public. All right, Harry, what are you going to do? How are you going to amend to the public for spreading misinformation? I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear about it. Truth and transformation. Endorse efforts that focus on exposing how historical and current imbalances of power, access, and equity are manufactured and propagated further with misinformation and disinformation, and on promoting community-led solutions to forging social bonds. So basically, they want to rewrite history. That's essentially what that's arguing, which Harry and Meghan have done multiple times. This is advocating for just plain old, flat old retelling of history. As a historian, that stuff makes you cringe because it's not right. History should be just objective fact. And yes, you may not agree with all the objective facts, but it should stand how it is. And yes, certain things are open to interpretation, but at the same time, truth does matter. And yes, sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, and that's life. That is just life. Workforce diversity. Increase investment and transparency to further diversity at social media platform companies and news media as a means to mitigate misinformation arising from uninformed and disconnected centers of power. This I have a big issue with, and I noticed this actually in a movie a couple years ago. I think it was called Late Night or something. It was a Mindy Kaling starring and written movie. She wrote it. It was her and Emma Thompson in it. And the whole thing was she became a writer for this late night show, and there was some clashes and some cultural clashes and those sorts of things. And so at the very end of the movie, the conclusion was, well, you just need to make the writer's room diverse. It was too, I think, white before, but now you just need to make it diverse. And I'm like, but are they funny? It doesn't matter if it's diverse or not. What matters in that situation is, are those people funny? If they're not funny, or if you're just hiring them because they're a particular skin tone and not because they're funny, well, then your jokes are going to get worse. They're not going to get better. It's actually Jerry Seinfeld actually pushed back on this. So go ahead and take a watch to a little bit of this video here.
I have noticed that most of the guests are mostly white males of 22 episodes.
Yeah,
that you've had.
Get into that.
No, but you
take a look over here, Peter. What do you see? A lot of whiteys. People think it's the census or something. I mean, this has got to represent the actual pie chart of America. Who cares? It's just funny. You know, funny is the world that I live in. You're funny, I'm interested. You're not funny, I'm not interested. I have no interest in gender or race or anything like that, but everyone else is kind of with their little calculating, is this the exact right mix? You know, I think that's, to me, it's anti-comedy.
So yeah, Jerry Seinfeld, not a fan of those sorts of things, which I love, because it's like, if somebody's funny, they're funny. I don't care what they look like, if they're funny. And I don't care what my journalists look like or what the people at a company look like. I just want them to do their job. I just want them to be competent in their field. Their diversity quota doesn't really matter to me. I just want competent people. And so again, this difference between diversity and competency, I think, is something huge going on right now in the culture overall. Comprehensive federal approach. So they literally want, again, the federal government to monitor and censor information they don't like or think is misinformation. Again, hugely dangerous. Whole book on 1984 is kind of about this. So it's like communism, USSR, those sorts of things. That's why you don't do it. Okay, so it says, establish a comprehensive strategic approach to countering disinformation and the spread of misinformation, including a centralized national response strategy, clearly defined roles and responsibilities across the executive branch, and identified gaps in authorities and capabilities. That's scary to me. That's scary. We need a national response team if there's a rumor on social media. I mean, generally the wisdom of the crowds does prevail at some point. That's sort of what happened. So this idea all of a sudden that we need the federal government examining everything that's posted on social media and determining and censoring what is true and not true. Again, do you want that? Because I certainly do not. I do not trust a government to tell me what is true and what is not true. That is not their job. Their job is to govern. Their job is to not govern my mind. Their job is to govern and make sure the facilities and certain things we are all able to access. They're not there to determine what I can think and what information I should have access to. Yes, of course, when you come to the CIA and national security, of course there's things I do not need to know. But regarding Harry's visa status, I would argue that we do need to know, for example, if he has a diplomatic visa or if he violated his visa application by lying about his drug use or something like that. Somewhere there's been a lie told. It's hard to believe that there was not, so we deserve to know that. Again, I don't think the government should be in the spot of determining what and how we think. And I don't get the top of this, but this says, hold super spreaders of mis and disinformation to account with clear, transparent, and consistently applied policies that enable quicker and more decisive actions and penalties, commiserate with their impacts, regardless of location or political views or role in society. That will not happen. If a government with a particular party, and I don't care which party it is, both parties could 100% be guilty of this. In the United States, obviously, we really only have two parties. But any one of those parties, can you imagine any of them being able to have the power to stop information, I mean, that did sort of technically happened in the last election. They said the Hunter Biden laptop story wasn't true. Well, it turns out the entire thing was true, and they knew that the entire time, but they still tried to pull it from every single website and say it wasn't true. That is happening. And so why in the world do you want to have the federal government there? Like, there could be like prison penalties for stating that you don't like Harry and Meghan. Like, no, that should not happen. Again, free speech reigns, Harry. It's not your personal kingdom. If you want your own personal kingdom, find an island out in the Pacific somewhere where nobody's on it, sit your family on there, and then you can rule your own little kingdom and do whatever you want. I don't care. As long as it's a little atoll in the middle of the Pacific, you can do whatever you want. As long as it doesn't affect me at all. Again, this disturbs me from Harry and Meghan. And then we also have, obviously, this campaign didn't stop, and Harry and Meghan voiced concerns to Spotify over COVID misinformation. So this was about Joe Rogan, and when he would have different people on who had different opinions about COVID, that was too scary. So it says, on Sunday, an Archwell spokesperson said hundreds of millions of people are affected by the harms of rampant mis and disinformation every day. Last April, our co-founders began expressing concerns to our partners at Spotify about the all too real consequences of COVID misinformation on its platform. We have continued to express our concerns to Spotify to ensure changes to its platform are made to help address this public health crisis. We look to Spotify to meet this moment and are committed to continuing our work together as it does. And again, I thought that whole thing was incredibly silly. Yes, do we have different opinions? And yes, have some of those turned out to be true? 100%. Because different pieces of information are good. The more information that's out there, the more information we are able to gather, we are able to weed through and come to perhaps a better conclusion. Harry and Meghan, though, no. It is all about control. It is all about controlling the narrative and information about Harry and Meghan. And they will wreck free speech in the United States to make sure nobody says anything bad about them anymore. And is that not frightening? But we have a great counter to that, which is our own federal government. The people, the organization that Harry and Meghan want us all to hold to account, which is even acknowledging that yes, Prince Harry may also be a liar. So the people who are campaigning vigorously against misinformation, why they may be the worst offenders of all. So guys, let me know what you think of this video. Let me know what you think of the US government calling Harry a liar. I love it. So guys, thank you so much. I mean, I will say they didn't explicitly say that, but essentially that's sort of what they said. So guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.